Hi everyone. So for today, I will be covering the security overview. So if you have been on my channel and then you have seen my previous videos, what I usually do is, as the first step, to give a big picture of everything included in that specific, I would say, portion or section. For example, if it's networking, what are the different services that are covered in the networking? If it's security, what are the different services covered in the security part? So for today, I'm going to be doing the security part. The networking part is what I have done before. So I'm going to quickly share my screen and then you will see what I mean. So again, this is the security part. So let's see what we're going to be having. So when I was doing an overview of the AWS services that were covered in the Solution Architect Professional Exam and the Networking Specialty, I divided everything into 4 main sections. So I've said what are the different, I would say, bigger, I would say an umbrella type of topic that has other services in it. For example, in networking and content delivery, we have Route 53, we have CloudFront, and then, for example, in storage and database, we have like S3, DynamoDB, and then RDS and things like that. So the bigger division is operation and communication, storage, security, and some other services, right? So and then if I kind of drop all the different services under those categories, this is how it will look like. I won't go into details in this one because I had covered those stuff before. And then, so this is dividing everything into 4 sections, but I wanted to further divide it a little bit more. So for example, networking and content delivery, those are the services. And then if you go into security and compliance, this will be the services that I will be covering. So the networking part is what I have already, I would say, recorded a longer video, everything in one video. And then I have divided that into 8 different parts. And then now what I will be covering is the security and compliance part. And again, it will be really a huge picture. So it wouldn't be going into details. For example, what is AWS config? I won't talk about that in isolation. So I will talk about those services while how they work together and how they relate to each other. So it's easy for us to remember something if we know how they relate to each other, if we know how they work together with each other. And then definitely I would say the last stage would be that you wanted to go into each of the services and in details and know how they work, right? Okay, so let me see what I have next. So this is the example, I would say, of the networking part, right? So this is the networking part I actually covered. And then this is how the networking part looks like in one slide. So I'm going to pause my video really quickly. I wanted to add a circle to my cursor so you can see my cursor well. So give me a quick second for that. Yeah, so I just got this green circle for my cursor, so it's a bit more visible. So where I left off was how the networking part looked like, everything working together, or how they related to each other in one big slide. So this is how that looks like. And then if I wanted to go, say, for the security part, right? So this is how I will be doing. I wanted to put my, I would say, my face somewhere here. So you can see everything. For example, if you have a company or an organization, right? And then you wanted to kind of work in the security part, how everything will look like. First thing will be the entry part, right? So you authenticate someone to enter it, and then you authorize them to, say, use certain services. So that will be basically the first part, right? And then afterward, it's the detection or the continuous monitoring, right? So whatever is happening within that company or within that organization, you really wanted to make sure that all the processes, all the different parts, or all the different services are running smoothly. So that's where you do, I would say, you work in the continuous monitoring part. And then the third one is prevention. So pretty much it is, so if there's certain, I would say, secure information that you have in your organization, you really, really want that to be kept secure, out of the reach of public, right? So for example, if we have security groups, they're actually keeping the EC2 instances or the compute services secure. And then the second level is NACL, which is Network Access Control List. And then we also have AWS Shield. We have, I would say, network firewall, and then we have gateway load balancer and things like that. And then the fourth part is protection, and then that basically includes, I would say, encryption. So any traffic or the internet traffic that's in transit, how it's going to be kept secure while in transit. So this is where we will be using, I would say, the encryption, right? So again, I won't go into details for this video of all of these services, but you have a bigger idea, right? So first part is the entry. What are some of the services that are used in AWS for entry, right? So if a user wanted to access a certain service, what are some of the entry tools they can have, right? If we wanted to make sure that all services are running smoothly and wanted to continuously monitor their performance or any kind of malware happening in there, those are the services that we'll be using, and mainly include CloudWatch, CloudTrail, Config, GuardDuty, Inspector. And then for the prevention part, we have something security groups and those other services. And for the protection part, again, is if the traffic is in transit, how we are going to make it secure. So that's the big picture that we have. And now in this video, I will be only covering the entry part. So the services that are under the entry part, mainly for authentication in authorization, that's when that's what I will be covering for this video, and then we'll have separate video for the detection part, a separate video for the prevention, and same goes for the protection part, right? Okay, so this is how it look like for the entry part, right? So you can see it's pretty much so everything in it does look like really a messy, like spider web, or even worse than that, and you want to know how everything they relate to each other. But I'm going to pick up one specific service, and then I will talk about the relationship with other and how they work together. So in this part, in the entry part, we will be covering identity and access management. So that's how you can create users and give them, I would say, login information such as a username and a password for them to be able to access the AWS services, whether it's Cognito, directory services, single sign-on or SSO, and then SAML&Web Federation. So that's what I have for this section. Let's see what we have next. So let's just again start from a very, I would say, a blank slide, right? So this part that you see, it's actually the AWS. So anything that's within this AWS, will be the services that are within AWS regions. And anything that stays outside, that can be, for example, corporate data center and things like that. So just, that services within AWS region will be included, or they will be placed in here, and then services such as corporate data center will be placed, I would say, outside of this region, right? Okay, so I did add a corporate data center in here, right? And then I'm adding, I would say, a few, so there are, I would say, data centers, you can call it data centers at the moment, right? But let's see what we have next, right? So we have a few users, and these users wanted to access some services in AWS, right? How do you do that? So we have, I would say, this server in here, and it acts as a portal, as a login portal, or I would say as an identity provider. So identity provider or IDP, right? So this server acts as a portal, as like the first place where a user wanted to log in, that's where they go. And then we have a separate server that actually stores those identity information. So this is a directory or an ID store, right? So this is the frontline worker. So for example, you're entering a building, right? The first thing you go is to the front desk. In that building, imagine that's a hotel or something like that. Or maybe even if that's your company building, right? So you enter, the first thing is, if it's your first time entering, you have to go through the, I would say through the security, and then they kind of, you tap your badge, your ID badge, and then they go back into their directory services or into their ID store just to authenticate that it's actually you. So this is, if you take the example of a company building, this is the front desk where you actually go and log in. And then this is actually the ID store where your information is stored. So this is kind of like the back end, and this is kind of like the front end for you, right? Okay, so and then I'm just putting some AWS services here in the AWS region. So we have an S3, we have EC2 instances, and then we have VPC with some public in private subnet. Now, these users wanted to access these services. How do they do that, right? So the one thing would be you create an IAM user. So this user, you create a username and a login, and then username and a password, and then you give them access to the AWS console, and that's where they enter, and then they do whatever they wanted to do. But if all of your, I would say, contact information for your users is already being stored on your corporate data center, so you really don't want to replicate, I mean, you really don't want it to do the entire thing again in AWS, for example, like creating another directory and then putting all the user information in there, or maybe creating, for example, you have 100,000 of users and you wanted to create usernames for them, and then you do that. You can definitely do that. I will talk about that later, and that's where the Microsoft Active Directory comes in. But for the moment, right, so there is a way that you can do that through IAM. You can create users and give them a username and password. They can access AWS services. But what if you have all that information about your users inside your corporate data centers? You don't want to do this entire thing again. You just wanted to use the same directly. This is how you do that, right? So users, I already have their information in my ID store, and then through this information, I wanted to authenticate them and authorize them to use certain services in AWS, right? So this is how it works. Okay, I just had to take a sip of my coffee, so I feel a bit tired. Anyways, I will try my best to do it well. So we have users, they wanted to access AWS services, and they do that through the identity, I would say store, or through identity store inside a corporate data center. So the first thing is they go through their front end. In other words, they go through their portal or identity provider. So they already have their username and login, and then they do that. So they log in into their portal, and then the next thing that happens is going back into the ID store or the directory services. Everything is being, I would say, confirmed that yes, this user exists. So that's how the authentication part works, right? And then once it's confirmed that it's a legitimate user, I would say a response is giving back to the portal, and then the portal is providing, I would say, a SAML token, right? At the moment, what is SAML is or what it is not. I really don't want to go into details in this one, but it's just, for example, consider it a token that they give it to you, And then through that, you can actually access it. For example, if it's your first time, you go to your front desk, and your front desk is going to give you your ID card. And then you take that ID card, and through that ID card, you can actually use all the services inside a company. And this SAML thing and this entire thing that we do is actually temporary credentials, right? For example, you go there and then they give you a guest ID card, right? They can use it for a specific day, or maybe you can use it for half a day. And then me saying about the temporary credentials, right? I will explain a bit more later what I actually mean by that, right? So let's just go further. Then we have the STS services, right? Let me just talk about what an STS is, right? So you can use AWS Security token services, I would say here, to create and provide trusted users with temporary security credential that can control access to your AWS services. So it's pretty much a service that provides temporary credential to your trusted users. And then by trusted in here, it means that they already have their identity information stored in your corporate data center. That's why they're trusted users. So what they do, once they are being authenticated inside directly in the corporate data center, then that SAML token is being given to the STS. So that user is going to be taking that SAML token from their portal, and then they go to the STS service. And then the role that's being used, or the API that's being used, is actually assume role with SAML, right? So to use that API, they go to the STS, and then the STS is providing temporary security credential, and that can be between like 15 minutes, or that can be for a few hours. So basically, what I was saying earlier, that when you can do that through creating IAM users, which is identity access management users. So you give them a username, you give them a password, you give them say access keys. You can do that. But if you already have these users in your corporate data center, you really don't want to repeat the entire thing. So that's when you just need temporary credential, and then security token services is what is the tool that's providing those temporary security credential. Okay, so now this user sitting here, as it went through its portal, got authenticated through the ID store or through the directory, got the SAML token, took the SAML token, went to the STS service, and then the STS service provided security token, so a temporary security credential. Now this user is happy. What's the next step it does? So it just take that temporary security credential, and it's going to access either S3 or EC2 or which other service it wants to do. So that's pretty much, I would say, kind of authentication with SAML while using Active Directory or directory services inside your corporate data center. So let me just give numbers what happens. Right? So first, the user is going to log in, and then they're going to go to the directory, and then they being authenticated. A SAML token is being provided to the user. Take that SAML token, and they call the assume role with SAML API, and then they go to the STS, and STS is going to provide the temporary security credential, and then they're using that temporary security credential to access the services within AWS. So that's pretty much what it is. So, okay, let's see what we have next, right? Am I double doing it? Anyways, okay. So this is, I would say, another way for you to remember what happens, right? So for example, this user is me, right? So I'm giving the names to different services that you can remember. So this is me, right? And what's happening, there is a cake. So in this entire AWS section, I would say is kitchen, right? And then this S3 is a cake that I really, really wanted to eat, right? So this is me sitting here. So I am a user, and I'm sitting here. I really wanted to eat that cake. It's in the kitchen. And then in the kitchen, we have a chef as well. And then the chef is actually the STS service. And then if they give us, I would say, the token, that yes, you can eat the cake, then yes, we can do it. Otherwise, we cannot, right? But still, me sitting here, I actually have my brother Sam. So I go to his room. So in the SAM is actually SAML, right? So, or the identity provider. So this, the identity, the portal or the identity provider is actually the SAM's room. So SAM or the SAML service, right? Is not the identity provider itself. SAML is actually kind of, I would say, if you keep it simple in here, it's actually the way we authenticate, right? So SAML is the person sitting there that can go and check back with my mom. So, and then now this identity provider is actually my mom's room, right? And then what happens is I want the cake, but I cannot do that directly. So first thing I do is I go to my brother's room. I ask Sam to go to my mom's room and authenticate or ask that I can actually get it, right? So Sam goes to my mom and asks if she can, if I can get the cake, if I'm kind of approved for that. And then Sam give me a token. And then I take that token and actually go to the kitchen. And then in the kitchen, the first person that I encounter is actually STS or the chef, right? And the chef give me, I would say, temporary security credential. And that by that I mean is you can eat the cake, but you cannot eat the entire cake, right? So this means like you can access the service, but you cannot have like, I would say long-term access to the service. So it's only temporary. This means I can only have access to the cake. I can only eat the cake, like a piece of it, but not the entire thing. Now I'm really, really happy. I take my, I would say my token and I go and I take the cake, right? So it's kind of, I'm not sure if it's making sense or no, but it's an easy way to understand it, right? So me sitting here, I'm really craving some sweet. There's a cake in the kitchen, but I know I cannot access it directly. So I first go to the SAM's room, which is SAML and the identity provider. They talk to my mom. Mom says yes, they can actually access the cake. And then I go back, take that token that Sam gave it to me, which is like the SAML token. I go to AWS, which is the kitchen, and then there is STS service, which is the chef. I give it to the chef. Chef says, okay, here you go. You can eat the cake, but you cannot eat the entire cake. And I kind of take the token and I actually eat the cake. So this was an example of me trying to remember that. Okay, dokie. So this is the SAML 2.0 Federation with AWS API access. And then if you can see, this is not my slide, right? So this is one of the slides I took from Stefan Myrick, right? So I'm taking his course on Udemy for Solution Architect Professional Exam. I know I'm taking this thing without his permission, but the reason is I cannot reach out to him, or I actually reached out to them, but they're not responding. Probably they don't have enough time to, I would say, reach out or answer personally to each and every student. So I'm using his slide and adding my own, I would say, a little bit content to it. And just to give credit to his work, I would say that I highly suggest his course on Udemy. It really helped me both for Solution Architect Professional Exam and also the Networking Specialty Exam. His slides and all the content that he covers are really good. So here you go, just that I use his slide. I'm just suggesting that you guys buy his course on Udemy. And I really hope it helps. Okay, so let's see what we have next. Okay, and now we have, this is SAML Federation with AWS console, right? So again, it's me sitting here. I go through the SAM room, which is the portal or the identity provider. I go through the identity store, which is my mom's room, and then they give me a SAML token. I took that SAML token, and actually in this case, I consider this one as a plate, right? So once I go to the kitchen, the first thing I go to the kitchen table and I get a plate from there. And then this plate, in this case, would be the AWS sign-in endpoint for SAML. So that's the, like, I would say the URL that you can use to log in. And then I get that. And then once I got the plate from the kitchen table, I still have to go through the chef, which is the STS service, right? And then the chef is going to give me, again, temporary credential through that URL. And then I'm going to I will be redirected to get the cake that's sitting on the kitchen table that I'm really looking forward to. be eating, right? So this slide and then the previous slide is almost, I would say, similar. So what did happen? Let me just go back. Oops, I think so I went a bit further, forward rather than backward, right? So again, this was the AWS API access without the URL, with the login URL, and this one is actually with the URL. Okay, so this is just maybe like a short repetition for you of the different, I would say, steps for doing it with SAML. But there is a thing now. This identity provider, if we change that with Microsoft Active Directory, I would say Service Federation, right? So MS EDFS, if we, this identity provider is actually, most of the time, this is what they use, right? And then we have the identity store, right? And this identity store is actually the Microsoft Active Directory. So we have, again, this user will be going through the Active Directory, but in this case, rather than any active and rather than any ID provider, is actually the Microsoft Active Directory Federation services or the ADFS instance. And then the identity store is not any identity store, but it's actually the Microsoft Active Directory. That's one of the biggest one that most of the corporate data centers are using it at the moment, right? And then again, if I'm still using Stefan's slide, right? So I will be using a few more slides because for the SAML Federation and also Active Directory, these were like really beautiful slides. So I don't want to redo everything. I just want to use them, but with some addition from my side. Again, it's me. Now the SAM's room or the identity provider is actually Microsoft Active Directory Federation Services. And then this identity provider is Microsoft Active Directory. And then again, I go through the AWS sign-in URL, and then I'm also going to be using an IAM role. Again, I will be talking about IAM role later on, but it's actually, I would say, a temporary access to a service, right? So I'm assuming a role that I'm able to access certain services. Okay, so this was, I consider that as a plate, and then again, I need to go through the shifts. So I got my plate, which is the sign-in portal, I would say, in AWS. And then I went to the shift, which is STs, and then the shift gave me, I would say, a yes or a token. The yes, you can actually access it, which is in this case kind of like temporary credential. And I use those credentials to actually access the gig, right? So it's pretty much the same, but instead of any directory, we have the Microsoft Active Directory. Okay, so again, this is now a custom identity broker application, right? So now, instead of Microsoft Active Directory, you can use any other custom directory. So in this case, it says like use only if identity provider is not compatible with SAML, right? So if this identity provider is not compatible with a SAML, then that's the time when you use a custom identity broker. So I really won't want to go much into details on this one, and that might be like, I would say, a more advanced concept. But at the moment, I'm just going to be going through the same flow. So it's me sitting here. I go to the custom identity provider, and I'm being authenticated. And then I go back to the STS service, and then the STS service gives me some security, a temporary security credential, and I'm using those credentials to access those services. Okay, so that's what we did so far, right? So now if you can see, I'm adding, I would say, Amazon, Google, and Facebook. That's where we talk about the Web Identity Federation. So the first part that we talked about was actually SAML Federation, right? And then this one is Web Identity Federation. So how do we do that, right? So let's see. I'm having my users here, right? And then these users wanted to access the services, these AWS services, but they wanted to log in through Amazon or through Google or Facebook or whatever other I would say, or Twitter or LinkedIn or anything like that. So you're not logging directly into AWS. You're not logging through your custom, through your corporate data center, right? But what you're actually doing is you're logging through Amazon. For example, if the user have some identity information or kind of an account with a corporate data center, it's just easy. They just wanted to log in through that, and it's actually doing all these processes in the background, and then they're being authenticated to access it. But again, that's temporary access, right? So through SAML, it's temporary access. Through Web Federation, it's temporary access. But if they're doing IAM, and they're having an account, a username, and a password, and sometimes I would say access keys as well, that's long-term access. But through SAML and through Web Federation, that's temporary access, right? So now it's me. I don't have any company account, but I know I have my Facebook, I have my Amazon, and then also I have my Gmail, I mean, my Google and everything. So I'm going to be logging through that. So once I log in, then they give me an ID token. So this entire process is actually happening in the background. You won't see like who is sending tokens to whom. You really don't want to see that process. So you simply do is like you log in through Facebook, you wait for a few seconds, and then after that, you're giving access to the next steps, right? Okay, so what do we have next, right? So this one, username, I mean user, not username. My apologies. Okay, so the user logged in through Amazon, they got an ID token. And next, what happens is they take that ID token and they go to the STS. And mainly because this STS is actually part of the Identity Access Management, or IAM. Yeah, so that's the place where you get your temporary credentials, right? For example, this is someone sitting and then they give you stamps. So whenever you need temporary credentials, you just go to them, they give you temporary credential and then use that. And after a while, they will be invalid and you cannot use them anymore, right? And for this one, they use assume role with Web Identity Federation. So with SAML, it was assume role with SAML, but when if it's with Web Federation, then you do is assume role with Web Identity API. So you use that. There was no space. I put 2 stirks here in this one because this line actually belongs to this arrow in here. So they used the ID token and they went to the STS, calling the assume role with Web Identity API. And now the STS is providing that. So those, if you see those keys, they're actually a representation of a temporary security credential. So the user is provided temporary security credential, and they took those credentials and then they access the AWS, right? So this is the Web Federation. So this part was about the SAML Federation, and this is the Web Federation. It's pretty much kind of the same steps, but instead of a corporate data center holding your identity information, now your identity information is actually resting with, I would say, those third parties such as Amazon, Google, and Facebook, right? So I'm just adding some numbers so you remember. So I put like a purple rectangle around these third party providers, right? So in those numbers actually relate to that one because I have some other numbers here too. So not to confuse them together, I'm color coding them. So anything related to a Web Federation is actually in purple, right? So first you log in, then second you get an ID token, and then you take that ID token with assume role with Web Identity, go to STS, and STS is providing you temporary security credential. You take those security credential, and then you go to web service, to AWS services, and then just use them. Now you have access, and that's again a temporary access, not long-term access. Long-term access come with IAM. So I think so we did cover like quite a bit. There was a huge topic with SAML Federation and Web Federation. So those were some really confusing topics for myself when I was studying them in isolation. Every time I would learn it completely well, and I would say, oh my God, I am now an expert on that. And the next day I won't even remember the second step. What's happening, because they were kind of, I would say, have similar steps. And because of that, you kind of mix them up together. You don't know which one belongs to which one. But having both of them together on the same slide kind of helps you to remember them, how it works. Again, I will be providing the slides. So that will be like a PDF. And then if you go step by step, they will give you everything one by one. So it's not like everything in one slide. It will be like each specific, like one thing will be coming up at one time, and then it will be easy for you to follow and understand the different steps that are happening here. Okay, so again, I'm taking this slide from Stefan, right? I really hope he is okay with that, but I just want to say, go to his Udemy courses. They're really amazing courses. So I have a Web Identity Federation without Cognito. So I didn't talk about the Cognito purpose. I would say Cognito service, but it's again a way for your users to be authenticated, to have access to AWS services, right? So Cognito is a huge topic. Again, we might go into more details another time, but at the moment, it's a way for you to enter, for you to be authenticated, and for you to be authorized to use certain services in AWS, right? So if we have Web Identity Federation without Cognito, so there is no Cognito, how does it look like, right? Excuse me. So it's me, right? Again, sitting here, and I want some desert, right? But this time, instead of going instead of me being at my own place, I'm at my aunt's place, finally, right? And she has cooked a lot more dessert rather than just one, right? So here you go, she has S3, EC2, and then I think so this is Red Chef. I don't remember those icons stands for. But anyways, there is a lot more dessert sitting in the kitchen, and I really, really wanted to eat those dessert, right? So again, it's me sitting. I know I cannot directly go to the kitchen. So what I do, I have my uncle, I have my aunt, and I have my cousin, right? So Facebook is my cousin, Amazon is my uncle, and Google is my aunt, right? So here you go. I have those people at my aunt's place. So I first go to them, and then they know me. I am actually their niece. So it's my aunt. I am her niece. She knows me, she authenticates me, right? And then once I'm authenticated, I go to the chef because they have a special chef. That chef doesn't know me, but my aunts know me. So my aunt gives me a token. I take that token and I go to the kitchen. In the kitchen, I am encountering chef, the first person in front of the door, and then he just standing there and say, okay, what do you want? Okay, I showed him I would say, my authentication token, right? And once you see that, yes, okay, I'm authorized. And then what he gives me is again a temporary credential because the kitchen is really big, and then actually the dessert is placed on another table far away from him. So he's giving me some, I would say, some kind of token, which in AWS world is called temporary security credential. I take those credentials and I go to that table, and then again, there might be someone standing there to make sure, authenticate me, I have the right credential to eat those desserts, right? So what happens once they see that I have the right credential, and then again, since they are temporary, this means I cannot eat everything and all of them. I have to pick a specific part from a specific cake, right? And then that's also the purpose of it. For example, I might have access to put objects into S3, but I might not be able to delete them, right? So I can view them, I can add them, but I cannot delete it. So that's the purpose of security credentials. They define what you can actually do with those services. And then with my chef scenario, the chef is going to tell me that she can eat from this green cake, but she cannot eat anything from this orange cake, right? So here you go, I have some restrictions. And again, I cannot have access the entire day. I can only go into the kitchen, into those desserts for maybe like 1 hour or maybe like 15 minutes or not more than that. So I hope this example of the kitchen, me in my aunt's place is kind of making sense with the Web Identity Federation, right? So this is how it works. Next up, I think so I will be covering the Cognito service, right? This is where we left off. And now I'm adding Cognito. Let's see what Cognito is doing, right? So it's going to be, now it's the same thing, it's the same process. It's me there. I'm going to log in through the third party or through web identity, right? So Amazon or Facebook, they are giving me an ID token. I took that ID token. And then I go to Cognito. Before, you remember, I used to go, the third step was going to STS directly, but in this case, I'm actually going to, I would say, Cognito. I'm just checking my time. So it's 7:20 almost, right? So I would really want to stop here because it's pretty late for me. I have to run home. And then I'm going to be covering the Cognito part and the rest of it, which is actually the directory services in my next video. So I really hope this was helpful up to this point. And then I wish you guys all the best. See you next time. Bye-bye.